Hello, welcome to my fall TBR video where I will be talking about 10 books that I want to read this fall. Returning viewers may notice that I'm in a new location. The new filming book nook has begun. I went thrifting yesterday and I bought this new armchair and I fit it in my car somehow with some bungee cords and drove down the highway with my hatchback open. So that's always fun, but it's here now. I'm not totally done decorating and moving stuff around, but here we are. Every book I own is in these 3 cubes, and this stack is also library books, by the way. So I'm not against maximalism on BookTube, but it's not me. But I'm sure I'll talk about my book nook a little bit more in another video, probably. But for now, it's time for the fall TBR. There are a few categories of books that I see booktubers talk about a lot when we're talking about fall books. So I consistently see spooky books, so things that fall under the horror, mystery, thriller umbrella. On the contrary, we talk about cozy books. And then thirdly, I think like dark academia or books with academic settings, because at least here in the US, fall marks the start of the school year. I want to be transparent that my fall TBR list is only mildly connected to those typical fall themes, because I was thinking about things that were like not necessarily thematic for fall. So I was thinking about the National Book Awards long list, which were announced last week, and I have goals this year to like read from a lot of different prize lists. So those prize lists making it into my TBR. I also generally have a desire to catch up on 2025 releases generally, because I know that those best books of 2025 lists are going to start coming out, and I know I'm going to have FOMO about reading more of the books off of those lists. I also want to make progress on series that I've been working on for a long time and not let those fall by the wayside. And then I want to read spooky stuff. So that in that order, it's kind of the books that I went through. So let's get started. The first book is The Antidote by Karen Russell. This is a book that I've seen on several best books of the year so far lists from major publications, and it was additionally longlisted for the National Book Award for Fiction last week. And so that's really pushed me over the edge to say, yes, I want to read this, and I want to read it sooner rather than later. It is also somewhat thematic for fall because it is about a prairie witch. So this is what the National Book Award wrote. Like their really brief 2-sentence synopsis of the book was: The Antidote is set in a Dust Bowl era fictional Nebraska town on the brink of collapse, bracing against the forces of the Great Depression, weather catastrophes, and the community's violent histories with indigenous people in the land. A prairie witch offers the town's residents a solution to their worries by safeguarding their darkest secrets in her own body. But a question remains: how long can we avoid the truths of our past and of harm caused? I recently finished The Buffalo Hunter Hunter, which is a vampire story that primarily takes place in Montana in 1912. And for the record, I loved that book. This book also takes place in the American West of the early 20th century, and it seems to grapple with similar themes about confronting history. So I'm definitely intrigued by the premise of this one, and I'm excited to pick it up. I took some of my library books off of my shelf because some of the books I'm about to talk about are books that I've already checked out from the library. So the next book is this novella, Hunchback by Sao Ichikawa, and it's translated by Polly Barton. As you can see, it's very slim. So this is another one that the National Book Award resurfaced for me. This was longlisted for the International Booker Prize earlier this year, and it was just announced on the long list for the National Book Award for Translated Literature as well. The National Book Award described this book like this: Hunchback follows Shaka, who was born with a congenital muscle disorder and relies on an electric wheelchair and a ventilator. Shaka is deeply immersed in her virtual life and finds herself pushing boundaries in a realm where physical constraints are immaterial. Taking online courses, trolling on social media, publishing explicit fan fiction, and unapologetically seeking pleasure. Translated from the Japanese by Polly Barton, this novel invites readers to question the sexism and ableism that run rampant in society and often unconsciously in ourselves, as well as the power dynamics that intersect with conceptions of autonomy, disability, and desirability. So this one, again, intrigued me when I saw it earlier this year. And finally, I'm motivated to pick it up again now that I've seen it again and again. Excited to get to this one. It's also so short, so if you're doing like Shorty September or Novella November, here's one you could consider. Another 2025 book in translation that I want to read this fall is When the Cranes Fly South by Lisa Ridson. I think this was originally published in Swedish last year, but it was translated into English this year. And this is a book about a man at the end of his life, reflecting on his life and his relationships. And the blurb also says that his son starts to insist on taking his dog away, claiming that he is too old to properly care for the dog. So obviously this sounds like it will be a very emotional read, and sometimes I am looking for a tearjerker emotional book. And then I have one more National Book Award long listy on my TBR from the nonfiction list. This is actually one that I had not heard of before I saw that list, but when I was going through the list, it really caught my eye. The book is When It All Burns, Fighting Fire in a Transformed World by anthropologist and wildland firefighter Jordan Thomas. So this book blends ecology, federal forestry, and indigenous history alongside an investigation of the fire industrial complex. And that sounds to me like an extremely relevant topic. And I have read a bit of nonfiction this year, but I definitely haven't really read any climate-oriented nonfiction. And that sounds like something I do want to be reading. So excited to pick that one up. And again, thank you National Book Awards for bringing it to my attention. Another nonfiction on my list that I do already have out from my library is There Is No Place for Us by Brian Goldstone. This is a journalistic sort of nonfiction that examines the working homeless in the United States. So these are people who are working full-time jobs, but they still cannot afford rent. And it looks to me like this is the kind of nonfiction that sheds light on systemic issues and inequalities through like thoughtful historical analysis, but it also provides empathetic portraits of people who are affected by and engaged in those issues. And I think based on what nonfiction I have enjoyed reading this year, I think I tend to enjoy nonfiction with this approach. So I'm thinking of Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green and Everyone Who Is Gone Is Here by Jonathan Blitzer. Those are both examples of nonfiction that used a similar approach with their respective topics, and I gave both of those books 5 stars. So I reckon I'm going to like this one as well. Next, I have several backlist horror novels on my TBR. 2 of these are booktube darlings that I've wanted to read for a while now. And then one is a backlist book that's pretty specific to my reading journey, but I hope other people read it and discover it. So the first booktube darling that I'm planning to read this fall is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. My understanding is that Silvia Moreno Garcia has a new book out this year called The Bewitching, which is a witch story. I think it's multi-generational witches. But Mexican Gothic has been on my TBR since I got back into reading and since I started watching BookTube a couple of years ago. So that's the one I want to read first. So I really want to read it this fall and get it out of the way. What I know about Mexican Gothic is that It is a Gothic novel, you know, big house, spooky stuff, but it's set in Mexico and it has themes of colonialism. But it's really just one of those books that pops up everywhere and is recommended everywhere, and I want to be in the loop. Along those same lines, I need to finally read Monstrilio this year. Monstrilio is like one of the 15 books that I own that's in one of these cubes. I bought it at an independent bookstore last year because I really thought I would enjoy it. I love books that deal with grief, and this sounds like a very imaginative meditation on grief. The premise is that a mother cuts out a piece of her deceased son's lung and then she nurtures it until it grows into a little monster. Definitely sounds very interesting to me. The third backlist horror book on my TBR is The Lesser Dead by Christopher Buehlman. Speaking of being out of sync with seasonal reading trends, I had a hot vampire girl summer. I read, I think, 5 vampire books this past summer, and my favorite of those probably was The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. And in the closing acknowledgments of that book, Jones wrote, "Why even bother to write a vampire novel when Christopher Buehlman's The Lesser Dead is already out in the world?" And so, ding ding, that definitely caught my attention because I read 2 of Christopher Buehlman's more recent fantasy novels earlier this year. That's The Black Tongue Thief and The Daughter's War. And I loved both of those books. As far as I can discern, The Lesser Dead is about vampire adolescents and vampire children living in Manhattan in the 1970s, but I hardly even care what it's about. I'm just ready to jump into reading it based on the strength of Stephen Graham Jones's endorsement alone. And next we are in the series progress part of my TBR. So the last 2 books are on my TBR because they're series that I've been reading. They're long series. I want to continue making progress on them, and I want to make that commitment publicly so I don't lose track of them. So The Race of Scorpions is the 3rd book in Dorothy Dunnett's historical fiction House of Niccolo series. I've talked about this series a lot. I really love it. This book is set in 1462 in Cyprus, where Niccolo is going to be caught in the war between Queen Carlotta and her half-brother James, who is challenging Carlotta's right to the crown. If you like historical fiction, I can't recommend this series enough. The final book on my TBR is Pyramids by Terry Pratchett. This is the 7th book in the Discworld universe, and in this one it looks like Pratchett is tackling ancient Egypt. And these are just cozy comic fantasy reads, and I like to fit them in between my longer, heavier reading, but it's been something like 6 months since I read my last Discworld novel. That was Weird Sisters, I think. So I want to make sure I don't lose track of this series. I want to make sure I keep reading it at like a steady pace because there's like over 40 of them. So that is what I have for my fall TBR. I like to keep these lists short and achievable, but let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or if any of them have piqued your interest. Thanks for watching. Bye.